designing for people with disabilities and National Endowment of the Arts in Washington, D.C. At a local level, she's been a chairperson and department head of Suffolk County Zoning Board of Appeals since 2010, having first been appointed to the CBA by the town in 2005. Prior to that, she was appointed as the chairperson of the Suffolk Hamlet Stakeholders Committee and served in the capacity from 2004 until the committee work was completed in 2010. And she's been an active involvement in service in the community in Suffolk. Times selected for her 2010 Public Service of the Year Award. She was also a founding member of the town's Affordable Housing Advisory Committee and instrumental in drafting and eventual adoption of legislation and expanded housing opportunities in Southfield involving accessory apartments and accessory structures. Quite a resume. Anyhow, then we have Pat Kirkpatrick, who's also on the committee with us on the Civic Board. Pat is a native of Greenwich, Connecticut, who also spent every summer of her life out here. She did. Okay. She has a bachelor's degree at Lehigh University, and she's a general contractor in Westchester County for the last 30 years. Pat is on the zoning board of appeals in Greenwich for 18 years, and the last 5 years as the chair. She's a member of the new zoning update committee in the town of Suffolk. Lady?
I'm gonna try. Yeah, I'm used to speaking, so my voice projects being an academic for many businesses. So can you all hear me all right? Okay. Well, first I have to thank everyone for inviting Pat and I to have speaking to you this evening about a subject that we're both very well versed in and very concerned about. I'm going to begin by explaining what zoning actually is and where it came from. Okay. And then Pat's going to talk about the work that our Zoning Update Advisory Committee is working on now, and she'll show you what's available through the town's website. And I'm then going to conclude with a very brief review of what the powers and duties of the Zoning Board of Appeals is. So what is zoning? Well, most people have no idea, and there's a good reason for it. Because awareness typically comes only when there's a contentious project in a neighborhood that somebody gets concerned about, and then you show up and you become informed and engaged. Well, ironically, that's exactly where the origin of zoning came from. The story of zoning in America is the story of people attempting to legislate NIMBYism. Okay? And that's really what it is. Before zoning, there were things called nuisance laws, right, in the early 1900s. And if you did not like the way a property owner, your neighbor, was using their property, you could haul them into court and let a judge decide what to do about it. But then in the early 1900s, cities like New York and San Francisco experienced really rapid urbanization. And we all know that history. There was congestion in the streets. There was disease being spread. There was pollution from industry. There was all kinds of complicated problems that people began to make demands for. But factories and warehouses were another thing. I mean, they were literally in the city. And when I say the city, I'm talking about New York, that's the city. Not San Francisco, sorry. And don't call it Frisco. But anyway, factories and warehouses were actually encroaching onto very fashionable shopping areas along Fifth Avenue, much to the dismay of fashionable shoppers, and to say nothing of the storekeepers who owned them. And at that time, actually, new techniques in building construction were allowing high-rise skyscrapers to just go higher and higher and higher without any concern for the consequences. And they were literally robbing neighborhoods of fresh air and light filtering down to the street. Now, the straw that broke the camel's back was the Equitable building. It still stands at 21 Broadway. That building was actually built in 1915 and with no setback requirements at all. So its height reached all of 535 feet straight up. and it cast a 7-acre shadow over properties. Well, you can imagine the quality of life that impacted, plus the value of those properties. So citizens began to demand that the city officials do something about regulating buildings. The city responded a year after that building went up in 1916 and literally created the first comprehensive zoning code in the country. And one of the things it did was the following. It said, okay, you can build those buildings right up to the lot, but you can only go up a certain height. Then you gotta set the bulk of the building back. Then you go up some more and you set it back some more. What they really did was regulate the profile or shape of the building and not the height. But that gave a lot more air and light to the ground level. And that's why you may wonder where those, that whole period has very similar shape. Those buildings, like the Empire State Building, which is referred to as the Wedding Cake Building, that's where it came from. And those setbacks were literally codified, and they're very similar to setbacks we now have here in our town, the town of Suffolk and other municipalities that have that kind of code. The regulations that they also put into place created certain zone districts and began to say, in this zone, you can have that use, in this zone, you can have that use. And later they began to look at how certain zones are not compatible with each other. Okay, so I have to just take one second to mention this though. You know, although zoning codes were used to regulate zoning, they were also used to regulate who could live there. Social engineering. I'll give you a couple of good examples. They were used to enforce racial segregation. That, thank goodness, is a practice that's no longer legal, but in San Francisco, 1904, the city established 3 different residential zones. And it prohibited from all of those zones wash houses and laundries, which essentially prohibited all of the Chinese population that were running and operating those businesses. Now, a more familiar example to us here would be the creation of single-family residential zoning. That really is what fostered, with the GI Bill and so on right after World War II, the spread of suburbia. And they were historically segregated by race, illegally now, because it was actually believed that to live in a racially integrated neighborhood was going to lower your property values. And one of the goals of zoning is to protect property values. So in summary, zoning laws were put into place to actually take the land owned by any municipality and to divide it up into zone districts and to then determine what uses are going to be allowed in each of those zones and what process you're going to have to follow in order to develop your property or your land. But the overarching goal, as I said, is essentially to protect one's land, to establish stability and conformity. Actually, an interesting example is that prior to suburban development, accessory dwelling units proliferated all throughout the country, everywhere. They were very commonplace. But the rise of single-family zoning as the quote American dream of, you know, one house, one lot, picket fence, front yard, Cocker Spaniel, depending on what area you're in, all of that, essentially, zoning, suburban zoning, regulated ADUs out of there because they really wanted to have one house, one dwelling, no intergenerational, nothing, that was it. Single family zoning, and there's a reason why that term's used that way. I do want to just mention zoning laws, by the way, are often referred to as land use regulations. It's the same thing. They're enforced by the police power that local and state governments have. So that's where enforcement comes in. And here in our town, zoning was put into place first in 1957. And so now I'm going to have Pat talk about what we are now doing. There was an update in 1989, but we are now working, the town is working, and we're part of that with consultants and so on really having a close look at all the zones in our town and what we can do and what we want to do to preserve what we have. So I'll return this forward. Yep. So,
What do you want to
do you?
Yes. So this is off the town website, or it's the only update committee website, but it's a great 3-minute video, so I'm start with that.
Well, you can do it.
Yeah.
Zoning is a set of laws that control the physical development of land and the use of property.
That's not sure.
Wait, you want to come in with you?
You know what, I will. I have 3 minutes, and I need any more challenges. Swivel my head around. Like the exorcist.
I know that sounds right. Let me see if I can. Yeah. There, no, still nothing?
Regulating what uses are allowed.
I have it here on this one. It's.
Stay home. I'm so. I started. I saw
No, I have it here, I'm sorry. I have it on this, I kind of see it.
Yeah.
Can we all watch it later?
Yeah, it was a great, it's a really great. With drawings and everything, we're really sorry.
You know what, so we can follow what we feel.
Yeah.
She can get the sound of it. All right, so we'll forget the fact that we had a nice website.
It's nice to have video on YouTube. We'll send that link, we'll
Yeah,
follow
yeah.
up email to everybody, and we'll send that link.
Sorry. So the basics, I wanted to just start by explaining zones, because it's Leslie mentioned there's zones all over town. And there's a lot of them, and one of the things we're looking at as a committee is whether we need to change how many there are. We have 12 hamlets within the whole Suffolk town, and you don't want 12 different sets of rules. It's a complicated thing, but there are a lot of different zones. This is just showing you, this is really nice to show you the actual different areas that are zoned, in different colors, different zones, to give you a sense. Coming down into residential down here by Nassau Point, and that, there's a lot of agricultural. And then Cutchogue has a very small sort of middle of town compared to St. So that's your different zones, and the other part of that would be what is as of right. All right, so this is more about the zones. So so R80 is 2 acre zoning, R40 is 1 acre zone. AC means agricultural, conservation. And light industrial would be along the railroad tracks traditionally, where we had people shipping things and things, so, and hamlet businesses downtown, and general businesses can be more out than just specifically within the hamlet. So R40 would be a 1 acre zone, R80 would be 2 acre zone, that gives you a sense, that's mostly residential. There are, and this is all from the website, so you can look at the different uses, and that's the things that we're looking at, and we spent an hour and a half looking at. What uses may or may not be appropriate going forward in town to a piece of property, whether this is a commercial property or whether it's residential or marine. And a lot of the zones were set up, and the uses specifically were set up because somebody was needing it, and so they added it. So there's like a zone that says, and bakeries are included, or baking facilities are included. So very, very specific things that were just put in to cover the bases. So we're trying to clean that up. Another big thing that's always talked about is as of right, and Leslie mentioned it. As of right means that what I can do with my property without needing a variance, or without needing any special permission or special exception. These are the basis of what you're allowed to do within your property. And most of us probably care a lot about our own personal property, but then we will, particularly as the zoning update is going on, care very much, I think, about the commercial properties, the main corridors and stuff in town. That's what we're looking very much at. And part of it will also be the residential side. So as of right will be what I can do without asking. I can build a house of a certain size on a 1 acre zone. And probably what Leslie's saying, you have to stay here it is. So the uses are spelled out in the document table. Yeah. See? Oh, no, that's, sorry. Next one. You go back to this out. Those are all your uses. So those are like within light industrial, these are all the different things, that, as you can see, cold storage plant, some of those are baking facilities, pretty specific, and probably may not even apply in today's world. So we're gonna look at all those and kind of crunch down ones into a more logical. Because if you have that, we can do it as of right. You know, if you fit into that category. And so that's mostly going to apply, as I said, in the commercial. Yes. Yeah. So this is just a really quick, the town put this on, and it's on the website, but I thought it was really interesting because this is what percentage of acres, this is how many acres throughout the town in each type of zone. And I thought it was really, really interesting because Cutchogue has a very high percentage of agricultural conservation. If you look at it compared to the whole town. We like to see that we're still an agricultural town. Some of the other ones that I thought were really interesting. We're really high in the light industrial. We have about 100 out of 161 in the entire town. Some of them moved down. So that's just a sort of quick interesting thing. I like this. So it shows the different zones, how many acres are in Suffolk town compared to how many are in Cutchogue.
In fact, I have a quick question. How does that list of acres in zoning coordinate with the map that shows all that protected land in darker green shade? So there's a lot of protected, a lot of protected land, but how does that?
That's all in the agricultural protected. So that's
okay.
the AC.
Could you go back to the list?
So
So that's
So that's
AC,
the
And
80.
that's why we have so much,
AC.
such a high percentage.
Okay, but that corresponds to protected
Mm-hmm.
land on the map itself. Okay, yeah, thanks.
So this R40, you said 1 acre, so it's 1 acre and less.
Well, technically, it's 1 acre because we don't have that in the zoning rules. Now, there are definitely houses like my own, it's not an acre zoning part. There are a lot of non-conforming that were
Me too.
developed long before,
Right.
yeah, the street was developed long before anything.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying, and that's, there's a lot of rules, and then when you have that, when you come back to Leslie, you're gonna get back into, you're no longer as of right, because you have an undersized, so you want to, your rules are being different. So,
Yeah, 40,000 square feet or buildings. That's why we put 48.
Thank
yeah.
It's
Square
not a
footage,
big-
and I have to say, just to make things more.
Yeah. So the next one. So considerations, what you can do on your property, it depends on the zone you're in, and then your uses, which we talked about already. The next step is what can you actually do? So here you go, there's a consideration. Density. On a 1 acre zone, as we talked about, it's basically a single family house, as Leslie mentioned. But it will, as we're looking at these things and looking at, we might say a different zone or a more commercial zone has a higher density. So you're allowing office buildings in, or you're allowing maybe a place to have multi-family housing, things like that. So you're gonna look at how dense, how many items, how much property could be built out, is one of the things you're always looking at in zoning. Lot size would be the 1 acre versus maybe a smaller acre, or maybe versus 2 acre, which is the R80, and then it goes all the way up to R400, and then it goes to agricultural. Location. Oh, bulk, sorry. So bulk is about, and this comes up all the time, and every town looks at how they want to determine bulk. So it's basically what Leslie just said about how you don't want to build a whole lot of straight things because it will shadow your neighbors. It's not the prettiest thing anyhow, but some people like different looks of that. But there's always different ways to look at how, particularly in residential as opposed to commercial, but on commercial as well. You don't want an 8-story building. You want to say, so bulk will go to the number of stories, residential versus commercial versus different areas. It's going to go to how the close to the property line you can get to, which is setbacks. And then even how the shape of the building might be to allow air, like Leslie's example. So that's bulk. Location can determine as how a zone may be used. Along the railroad, as I said before, if we used to ship the potatoes, that's why the railroad came right through the middle, and all the area along the railroad is light industrial, and I remember watching potatoes. And loading and railroad cars. Another thing, that way that they can deal with zoning issues and some of the things we just talked about would be the architectural review. Some towns have that, we don't really have a lot of it yet. Certainly talking about it. And that would be looking at, like, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, they're huge on that kind of thing. They want to like very much say, I want a certain standard of styles, or a certain color my house has to be, or shingles you have to use, things like that. It's another way for a town to look at how you maintain the character. Because this is really what zoning is. Zoning is, as we said, how do you keep your neighborhood the way you want it to look like, how to maintain character. And so how are we looking at that? And that will be brought into the picture as we go forward on the project. Maybe. And I'm going to show you. So the Suffolk Town Comprehensive Plan is on the town website. I will tell you, it is the most amazing piece of literature that I have ever read in zoning. It's a very detailed plan that covers everything of, I think it took 8 years, is my understanding, to put it together. It covers everything, hamlet by hamlet, and goals, and what the problems are, and how much build out there could be, and who's to look at what. And that's the basis of what we're using for the zoning update. So it's really well worth going on and reading it. It's really long, and it's very detailed, but it's written, I don't wanna say dumbed down, but it's written in layman's language. It's not something that you gotta understand every terminology of. Phenomenal, if you really care about what's gonna happen in the town. Pick it up and read it, at least read it about our own Hamlet. So it's, because even the Hamlet's like maybe 4 or 5 pages, it's not a lot to read, but it's an amazing piece of work.
When was it written?
I think 2009, 2010,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and then it was, it took a while to learn, right? Right, but I think it was finished, it was a 9-year finish, but I then,
There's lots of community outreach.
Yeah.
So we never did some of those meetings, endless meetings.
So these are the links, we'll send these all out, there's a link to the comprehensive plan, the maps that we showed. And I'll add the YouTube video on zoning. It's really nice, it tells you, gives you a quick, simple about zoning.
Now I'm turning about Leslie to explain what happens if you don't like what you're zoning.
Well, you know, as Pat said, when the town adopted zoning, I mean, people prior to that built whatever they built, because they built it. So everything in current terms that was built before zoning was then given us, instead of a certificate of occupancy, it was a pre-certificate of occupancy, meaning it was built prior to zoning. And if you want to update a piece of property, you know, that is built prior to zoning, it's very likely that a lot of it is going to be not conforming to what the code allows. So this is where the zoning board comes in. Let me go through briefly who we are and what we do and why we do it. It's a 5-member board. Our supervisor is here, our board member, Councilman Neely is here. They appoint members to the zoning board for 5-year terms on a rotating basis. So one person's term is up, you know, at the end of every year, they either get reappointed or they appoint somebody else. And we have 3 people in our office who are very good administrators and are there to help the public. I'm going to go over 3 things as briefly as I can. This could be very long, but I'm going to make it much shorter. What can the ZBA do? What are our powers and duties? And where do we get them? I mean, what kinds of appeals can come to the ZBA? And what are the statutory bases for these different kinds of appeals? I'll talk mostly about area variances, which has to do with the bulk schedule, dimensional things, because that is by far and away the most common, the one that most everyone would be concerned with. Now, the ZBA is a quasi-judicial appellate court. It means it's a court of law of lay people. And we have the authority to hear and decide appeals from decisions by zoning enforcement officials. They are the building department case. You go to the building department, you say, I want a building permit, I want to do something. They will tell you, okay, you can do it as of right, because you're meeting all the code requirements for your land. If something doesn't meet the code, they write up what's known as a notice of disapproval. And that means you have the right then to bring that to the zoning board. And our job is to essentially listen to and evaluate the merits of someone's appeal for relief from that code. And I'll get to that in a minute. So we are a board of appeals, just like an appellate court anywhere else in the state of New York. We can reverse or affirm or modify decisions made. We can overturn building department's determination. We can grant permission basically to use property in a way that the code doesn't allow you to use it. So that's pretty sweeping. But what the ZBA doesn't do is zoning. That's a legislative determination. Our town board creates zoning legislation. We can go and say we don't think this is working, but it's a legislative body that creates zoning regulations. We grant relief from those regulations. So It's funny because people say, well, you're the zoning board, you do zoning. No, we do unzoning. Okay. So how do you even get to come before the ZBA? Well, as I mentioned, you get a notice of disapproval. You have to submit that within 60 days to our office with a complete application. The forms are on our website. All this information, including what I'm going to tell you, is on the ZBA's website. I put all of it up there a number of years ago. Keep updating it. Then we will calendar you for a public hearing as soon as we possibly can. We're so busy, so is building, so is planning. I don't have to mention anybody here just how much construction is going. Look, which makes it harder for us to get that calendar more quickly, but we do the best we can. And once a hearing is set, you will receive, we will put a legal notice in the paper so people know about it. You will have received from our office a big yellow card. You've probably seen them posted on property. That says what the date is and whose hearing it is and what the hearing is about, because we want the public to chime in. This is a participatory small town democracy at work. And the public has the right and responsibility to have a say in what goes on. So it's kind of a pleasure to conduct those hearings. Once a hearing is closed, if we hear everything in that one shot that we need to hear, where everybody says, yeah, we can make a decision now, we take that public record, we sit down and we try to look at the merits of what we have to evaluate. We have 62 days to make a determination once a hearing is closed. We almost never take it. We have 2 meetings a month, the first Thursday of the month and the third Thursday. Both of them are open to the public. The third Thursday is when we deliberate on decisions. So we will prepare drafts for every application that we've had a hearing. And they will be distributed to all board members. And we will then discuss them. And we will then vote. And we will make modifications sometimes and say, fix things up here or there. Board member says, I don't think that's clear enough, we should change the language. That is open to the public. It's available on Zoom. Those are on our agendas are posted on the town's website. And so that's how that works. Now, there are 5 kinds of appeals that we can hear. Each of them requires a different set of standards to be evaluated. There are different statutes for every single kind of appeal. First, we can interpret the code. Now, this is quite a challenging thing. And this is usually a request from somebody who has standing. Like the planning board will say, please interpret whether, like we did with the Mallon decision, one building that's got 10 offices in it, is that 10 uses or 1 use? Because if it's 10 uses, you need 40,000 acres for every one of those offices. That's not reasonable. So we said it's the same use. Okay, so since 2000, I actually did a spreadsheet of all the code interpretations the ZBA has done since 2000. And there were lots of them. And indicated the file number, so gave them to our zoning consultant. Because once the ZBA does a code interpretation, it has the force of law. And that means the building department has to use it in deciding whether it's conforming to a code or not. Okay. So my point was, either we codify these things and put them in the code so people know about them, or we get rid of them because they're antiquated. So that was a good start. Then we have, sometimes third parties can actually request a code interpretation. If your property is possibly going to be harmed by a decision, then you have standing before the zoning to appeal to have the code interpreted. If you don't think the building department correctly made a determination. Now, we also have special exception permits. This is widely misunderstood. And this is where a lot of people get confused. They're sometimes called special exemption, but it means the same thing, exception or exemption. This is actually, these are uses that, like Pat showed on the slide, they are already permitted in those zones. But they are only permitted by review by the zoning board of appeals to grant this special exception permit based upon our review of a long, long list, like check boxes, of what you have to qualify that gives you the right to do that. And that includes making sure there are no adverse impacts on adjacent properties or adjacent use districts. And so that's why we do special exception permits. Now, what are those? Bed and breakfast, okay, churches, schools, fire stations, funeral parlors. There's just a library, like the one we're sitting in here. In fact, this whole library was renovated with relief from the Suffolk Court of Appeals a long time ago. Restaurants, barber shops, storage facilities, very long list. You saw an abbreviated snapshot of which zones have so many uses. And so they do not go to the building department. The zoning board still has what's called original jurisdiction. They come directly to us. When it comes to certain things, I send them to the building department because they are the zoning enforcement officials. They should be telling us if a variance is required. I can look at it and say, I know that they need one. But correctly so, they need to have a notice of dispute. So we'll send them back to the building department. The building department, we have, accessory apartments and accessory structures. They have a whole long list of things that you have to do in order to qualify. And one of them is a minimum and maximum gross or livable floor area, okay? It can't be more than 700, 800 square feet, because 850 is already considered a dwelling by state code. You can only have one dwelling on one lot, right? So this is an accessory unit. And they will calculate, because they have the authority to do it, the livable floor area for the zoning board to say, yes, they conform to the code, or no, they don't make variance. Because I don't want to trust somebody's architect. I am one, but I don't trust. They're working for you, and they're coming to me. I'm not sure I believe them. Maybe I do. But, we have the point is we have a backup to that plan for that. We can also hear use variances. Now, this one has a very tough standard, because if you say you want, let's say you have a residential lot, you want to put a dry cleaner. You have to prove for every use the code allows that zone, in that zone district, you cannot realize a reasonable profit. And the code has said, just because you can't make a ton of money on something is not reasonable. So we have case law behind this. You have to submit financial records to verify that the use is not feasible and you're on the property that you own. It's usually a very, very difficult standard. I think maybe twice in 20 years of being granted the use variance. The waiver of lot merger is another one. In the 80s, in 1985, you're looking at me, this goes back a long history. The town upzoned because they were trying to create fewer building sites and actually fewer septic systems. And so if two parcels were held by the same family and the same name, adjacent, which happened. I mean, people bought a lot for their kids. So if that was the case, and it was held in one name, then it merged by force of law. We later realized there was something very punitive about this, because what would happen originally is that a husband would own one lot in his name, the wife would own it in another. It's called checkerboarding. It was fun. But when one spouse passed away, the other inherited them. It wound up in one name. So merger by death was an exemption the town board made in this case. But that's what waiver of lot merger is. And then it requires usually a lot line change to get the two lots back, and then that has to go to the planning board, say it's less. But if you start with the zoning board, now the most common that everybody knows about area variances. That's really relief from the bulk schedule that passes. They're all dimensional. They include all those setbacks, the front yard, the rear yard, side yard, behind side yard. It includes the lot coverage. In typical residential zones, the maximum is 20%, in zones it's 30%. So it depends on the zone. And the yard requirements for accessory structures. You know, typically, unless it's a waterfront property, accessory structures have to go in the backyard. But if it's a waterfront property, they legally can go in the front. So what are the 6 factors that we have to look at when we make a decision? It's not like, gee, I like that. It doesn't work that way. We do not personalize, we do not politicize. The law tells us exactly what we have to do. Town Law 1. Granted, the variance will or will not produce an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties. Now, how do we know what the character of the neighborhood is? We drive around. It's pretty subjective. I mean, it's difficult to define this neighborhood as opposed to that. But you ask yourself things like, well, what are all the lot sizes? Is this the smallest lot in the development? Are all of them predating zoning and they're all non-conforming? So almost all of them have excessive lot coverage because the house was built and, you know, before there was any lot coverage limitation. Do other houses there have similar non-conforming rear yard setbacks or front ends? All of those things will help. And we also look at if you're putting it in a backyard and there's, you know, totally screened, it has no visual impact on anybody. So it's not going to damage the character of the neighborhood particularly. If you want to put a swimming pool in your front yard, you have adequate screening, privacy from the street. Those are all things that we need to look at. The second is Town Law 2. The benefit sought by the applicant can or cannot be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than a very area. Can you make it conforming, still do what you want, right? Perfect example. Somebody's on the bluff. They want to put a swimming pool on the bluff. Okay? And they're running it this way, toward the bluff. And now they have an 85-foot setback. Total requires 100. Suppose you were to turn the pool this way, paralleling your house. Maybe scoot it over a little bit. Maybe it then becomes 95 feet, maybe even 100. So it's not like we negotiate, but we are attempting to evaluate if they have a reasonable alternative to that variance. So the third one, the variance granted is or is not substantial. Let's say the code requires that the side yard be 10 feet and you want 5 feet. Well, that's 50%, that's pretty big. But maybe you can cut something back a little bit and make it 8 feet or 9 feet, or maybe even conform. So that degree of variance is both by percentage, but also by impact. The magnitude in the context of the neighborhood, it's not just a percent. Where? Number four is evidence has or has not been submitted to suggest the variance in this residential community will or will not have an adverse environmental impact. So although our trustees, our board of town trustees has jurisdiction over wetlands and bluffs and so on, we have the right to look at environmental impacts as well. And to look, you know, I'm talking not just residential, this is commercial too. So is something going to cause traffic? Is that going to have an adverse impact on the environment? Will there be drainage problems on the property? Will there be impacts to bluffs and wetlands? Now, we do get constantly, when there is that sort of impact, potential environmental impacts, we get Suffolk County Soil and Water has been typically a good partner with us. And they have provided technical training, you know, technical people to come out and actually inspect the site for us. And they provide very detailed information. So we take that into account. We send it to our local waterfront revitalization program coordinator, Mark Terry. We cannot approve anything that is not consistent with our local waterfront revitalization program. And if it's not, we have to find ways of mitigating those impacts through conditions of approval that will then allow us to say, therefore, we now determine this consistent. That is what gave us home rule. That document was a brilliant, complex document that Valerie Skopaz, who was our former town planner, literally wrote. And other than that, Albany was going to tell us what to do. What do they know about Suffolk? Very little. So we have home rule, which works a lot better. We get comments from planning all the time. We have applications that have concurrent jurisdiction with planning, like commercial projects that require site plan approval. And sometimes they're lead agency, we used to be sometimes, but we do a coordinated review. And finally, the difficulty has or has not been self-created. Now, some people say, it's not my fault, I bought it that way. No, case law says yes it is, because you bought it and you were supposed to know what you were getting into, all right? However, the good news is that it is not determinative. It can still be self-created, because what we do is called a balancing test. We have to weigh these different factors. And in the end, we have to answer this one question. Does the potential benefit to the applicant outweigh the potential detriment to the community, or the other way around? And that is what the basis for our determination is. I did mention, I think, that we have to grant the minimum variance we find feasible. It is always the burden of the applicant to make their case before the zoning board. We create a public record through that public hearing process. And your comments become part of that public record. Okay? Letters you submit are part of the record. All of these are foilable. They are on the town's Laserfish website. If you want to see what's coming before the board, we have now, since COVID, we realized the power of Zoom. And so we are available now for people to participate on Zoom. And we are also able, by scanning all this stuff in before a hearing, able to allow you to look at it at your leisure. Moreover, we are able to put it up on a screen in the meeting hall where we have our public hearings, so that everybody can see it in the audience before, an architect or an agent or a lawyer or somebody bring up something and they show it to us and we try to hold it up and no one can see it. We'd be running out the hallway to see it. Now everybody can see the same thing at the same time. So this is really very valuable tool to get public input. Okay. One other thing, we can grant alternative relief. You may want this, but we may think that's not in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. So we can say, you want a 10-foot side yard. Well, we think 8 is far more appropriate. So we can grant alternatives. We can impose reasonable conditions and restrictions on the approval. As I said, we have to do that for LWRP if it's considered inconsistent. If it's consistent, we're fine. Let's say about that swimming pool, okay, in your front yard. Maybe you have a huge front yard, you have septic system in the backyard, you have little tiny side yard. So is that reasonable? If you can put in a really big, heavy landscape buffer as a condition of approval, and maybe a couple of other people in your neighborhood have swimming pools. We also have to look at prior ZBA decisions. They set precedent. So we'll say, are there other things like that in your neighborhood? Go hunt out the precedent. See what old zoning boards decided was okay in that neighborhood. We often establish non-turf buffers along the top banks and bluffs to protect. A buffer is the best way to protect environmental degradation on the bluff. That is setbacks. And trustees do it all the time. We will tell you, you want that shed over there, you're gonna have to put some screening over here so it doesn't bother your neighbor. And you can say, I can see that, very well, it's too tall. Let them put something up there so I don't have to look at it, right? We take all of that into consideration, and we are not allowed to base our decisions on anything other than what is in the public record. If we think that we have not obtained adequate information, we will adjourn to another date to get that information. And if something was done in error, which rarely happens, we have the right by majority present to reopen a hearing at any time. So that's kind of what the ZBA does. And it's really a challenge. It used to be, like 2 or 3 variances. Now they're coming in with 7. It's like, just shoot me down. But it's a challenging thing, but it's very important to our town. And you have to have a lot of skills to do it. You have to write well. You have to know how to use a computer. You have to speak well. You have to understand construction drawings. You have to know what construction looks like. You have to know zoning code. And there's it takes a long time because you don't go home and study zoning. This is job training, right? She did it too. You learn, when a new board member comes on, my task is to train them. Is to bring them up to date, to bring them up to speed. I give them so much homework, they want to cry. They go out with manuals like this, and so read them and talk to me in 3 days. That's it. Homework.
These are all volunteers.
No, actually, the members of the zoning board who are appointed by the town board and the members of the planning board, which is different than the planning department. The planning department consists of a department head, Heather Lansing, who I'm sure you know, and Mark Terry's associate planning director, and several in staff. And they are professional planners. They have a professional staff to do most of the heavy lifting for the planning board. The zoning board, and they can have pre-submission conferences. The ZBA is mandated by state statute to only do something before the public. Everything we do must be conforming to open meetings law, which means we don't even meet in a quorum. We go on site inspections by ourselves because 3 people out of 5 would constitute a quorum. And that would mean we'd have to notice it before the public, say, we're going to be inspecting this property at 3 o'clock on Thursday. So if anybody wanted to show up, they could. But we are not allowed to discuss the application unless it's in front of the public. So we're squeaky clean when it comes to adhering to those kinds of requirements. What else do I need to mention?
You were saying about, who's paid.
Oh, right. I knew I'd forget the money part. No. They're considered part-time appointments, and so they have part-time salaries that the town board determines every year. As I am what's called a de facto department head, because we really didn't have a department of zoning. It probably should be all one land use department, but that's a whole other conversation. But as the chairperson of the board, my responsibility is to run the staff in my department, to provide oversight. So I write monthly department head reports, I sign time sheets, I recommend promotions, I do annual budgets. So I operate as a department. I do get a small additional honorarium, really a small additional honorarium on top of the pay that I get as a zoning board. But zoning and planning board members all get paid the same when the town board decides what that annual stipend should be. Because it's a lot of work. The ZBA especially is very proactive. I mean, board members work. Not only do we do individual site inspections and go to hearings and read everything in each application and make notes before the hearing and ask questions at the hearing. But then the way we work it is that I provided templates when I took over. We addressed the state statutes, but the secretary was basically filling in the blanks for the zoning board. And I said, no, this is our fiduciary responsibility. So I developed templates for all these different kinds of decisions, most obviously the area hearings. It spells out what I just told you. And you have to write in the answers. It will or will not because is the important part. You look at these old decisions And it just said, it won't. I mean, how do you even figure out a precedent? It won't. So, no, things are a little more complicated. You need to fill the blanks. So that's what we do. And the way we do it is I will assign, 2 or 3 per board member. And they take the appropriate template, they fill it out. They send it to our office staff, who I said, you check the property facts descriptions, the upfront stuff that isn't about the reasons. And then I edit them. They send it to me, and then I send them out to everybody before the meeting. And I edit in, I don't know if you know what tracking is, it's a formatting device, the different colors, shows what you moved, all that. That's how we train board members. I send them back the tracking. I don't send them to other people, just the ones, whoever did one, because I don't want to embarrass anyone. And so I'll just say, you should have realized this goes here, not there. It's much stronger in this statute. So it takes a while, but we have a good board. We collaborate well, and so far so good. And we just have to keep on raising the bar because the stakes are too high.
So recourse, I'm sure, is litigation.
Oh, lots.
And I suppose all kinds of allegations are made, arbitrariness or subjective, or you haven't followed the statutes properly. How it suits everybody these days, but how successful is the appeal process of your decisions through litigation, and on what, and for those that, overturn one of your decisions, is there some typical basis that forms that successful appeal, or what's that whole process like?
Well, I think you obviously know something about this because.
Well, no, I don't. I hope I never do. I mean,
Yeah,
I think this is great, but I never want to come appear before you, so. All right.
Not the board and no, and we're not bad, we're just your neighbors, that's all. We try to make people feel comfortable. I know it can be intimidating because, I have a gavel. The gavel, by the way, was given to I think the town board in 1957 by the League of Women Voters. There's a flag, and I haven't had to use it very long, but occasionally I bang the red gavel. Most people are pretty orderly and we manage to remain pretty civil. But the only way we are overturned is if the court can find that we were arbitrary and capricious. And trust me, when I sign my name to a decision, it is not arbitrary and capricious. We have had litigation. We have almost inevitably been upheld by the courts. On rare occasions, they have basically sent them back to us for a settlement. And, that if we settle, it's just basically nobody wins if we settle, because essentially, I would rather slap a bunch of conditions on something because if I'm approving, I can condition the approval to mitigate problems. If we're settling, those conditions go away. So, yeah, we don't have a lot of litigation, but we certainly do have some. And, as we see more complicated projects coming before us. There's always.
And the boards have consistent in their deliberations and in their determinations. Then it's very difficult to sue successfully. That's one of the real.
I'm not planning any litigation. Curiosity of the process.
I don't understand what an agricultural district means. Is that straight only agriculture?
No, there are other uses that can be done in an ag district.
It's just a designation that came up with.
Ask the farmers.
It's different than reserve. So that's just the zoning category. And I'm not sure why it's different than R8. for R40.
That's funny you should mention that, because that's what we were talking about today at our zoning update committee.
That's what I don't understand.
It's not clear, and it's an excellent question, because we should have, protected agricultural land, ag land, and then R120 or residential zoning, and we're gonna try, those are the kinds of things, that are, this is why public participation is good, because if you say, I don't get it, you should get it. It should be a clear, user-friendly code. And that's some of the stuff that our committee's looking at. And I have to tell you, our board members, our town board members, our supervisors, have been very attentive. They don't have to be, but they come to these meetings, they listen, they make contributions. The public is invited to listen if you want, but there's many, many ways the public can participate. Oh, by the way, on that website, if you want updates, on when we're meeting and what we're meeting about, if you want to look at our minutes from the meetings, there's a link right on a little thing right on the website that says, I'd like to sign up for being updated on what's going on. And all you have to do is go to the town's website. It's southoltowny.gov. Go scroll down to the bottom. You're just going to see a bunch of buttons on the top. Just scroll down to the bottom and you're going to see Zoning Update Advisory Committee. Click on that and all that stuff Pat showed you and more will come up. And if you just keep scrolling down, you're going to see where you can sign.
Yeah, may I suggest just Googling what you want first, and it'll usually bypass most of those menus.
Yes, you absolutely can.
Hi, by the nature of zoning itself, it seems like everything is patchwork, right? And that's just the nature of it. And now we have all these, a lot of pressure with variances and development coming in. So my question is there an overall decision or picture of like this 30 miles of land we have out here? Like a final carrying capacity of square footage of land that will be covered by buildings and accessories and all the other things that we bring into it. Is there a bigger picture to look at, like finally, like we have a carrying capacity and then we stop?
Exactly, yeah, we looked at like final build outs, but because we have an active land preservation program, it's almost like a foot race in final build out. And as we change subdivision laws that affect density, then you're also able to kind of manage the amount of building. And then you get the clustering developments, things like that. And then what they're looking at now, the zones, different uses, that's gonna limit the amount of intensity of use in the zone also. So there's a lot of other ways of managing. So kind of like a web.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is we have,
The comprehensive plan really spells out how much in every single hamlet is available to. But then they also very clearly say in the objectives, you won't build out to that extent. There isn't actually infrastructure and things like that to do every single ounce. So it's gonna protect itself somewhat, but that's why I said the comprehensive plan is really important to read.
there are 13 goals in the land use chapter that the zoning update is right on there. But the zoning update, not just our committee's an oversight. We have wonderfully experienced consultants. And the town board vetted them and hired them, and they will report back to the town board, but there will be many steps, and many of you maybe, were at those meetings, and we had all those hamlet meetings where we had the lines presented. There will be much more, and nothing will get done without a public hearing. I mean, we can't change code without the town board.
Well,
No,
once,
there's
yeah,
not.
once we get recommendations, different changes, different zones, then we'll have a lot more
Yeah.
public meetings. That's when it should get a lot more hearings.
And one of the things that the code did not anticipate in 1989 were single certain uses. I mean, whoever heard of battery energy storage system? Where are they supposed to go? They don't even really fit the code. Should they go anywhere at all? Those are the kinds of things we have to really take a close look at. What is best for our town? And where should they go? I mean, some of those zones that you saw were there, as I think might have mentioned, because that's where they were. They were just built before zoning. So rather than making them non-conforming right off the bat, we said, okay, zone it for that. And that's why sometimes they seem to pop up all over the place like that. And our job is to cluster them, to get rid of them, to refine them, to change the uses. And we are an oversight committee because we are local people who reach out to our neighbors. And we want to make sure that what the zoning consultants tell us, we can review and agree with or disagree with or correct them. Because, you know, they know a lot, but they don't know what we know, we live it.
We're bringing a local perspective to everything.
I know the original plan had been that the zoning consultant was gonna come back with recommendations sometime in the summer. Is that still on track, or is there an updated timing for that?
I think it's on track.
And that would be July, August?
Sometime in summer. I don't think we have the time. It may be late summer.
Who is the consultant?
Zone Code is the name of the company. You can Google them, they're impressive. Have you ever been there in second? Zone Code.
We did our update in 1990, we did an update. We're still operating off of our original. So we've taken to, you know, Hamlet.
Oh,
I like your way better. It's right, that's what you-
come on over and join the noise. That's what everybody else seems to be coming. Might as well.
I do have a question about R40. Your most restricted residential zone is R40. I would imagine that's where the most. Where they're coming from, it's the 30.
Oh, gosh, and we have a lot of quarter acre lots out here.
They're all.
Non-conforming.
They're all up on Blue Horizons.
If somebody comes before you and they need several variances and you have a hearing, and then you keep the hearing open because they're going to go back and, you know, redo your plan.
Right.
What's the time frame then to come back to you?
Well,
When does it expire?
we try to do it the next month, but if we are totally jammed up, it's not, I mean, you have to realize sometimes these hearings will take 15, 20 minutes. I had a hearing for a shed in the side yard that took 2 hours. I think people just hated it. So I can't tell what the public's gonna do, and I respectfully, I don't like to cut people off. I mean, if it's redundant, people say exactly the same thing, I certainly will. But on the other hand, this is your opportunity to say what's on your mind. And I respect that, and I think our board does. So I don't know how long public hearings should take, but I would say they could easily take an hour apiece. Now, I've got 14 a month scheduled. Okay, and we have to do 14 individual site inspections each month, read 14 applications, then write 14 decisions. So, you know, it's just snowball. But what we will try to do is put it on for the next month. If not, and we will announce it right there. We will adjourn the hearing to another date. It might be 2 months away, depending. You know, sometimes they say, I need a month or two to work with my client. You're making me redesign this thing. And so that will be posted also.
What if a year or so goes by and they don't come back?
Then it's considered withdrawn. They have to start over. Yeah, you can't just leave it dormant forever. When I took on this job almost 20 years ago, we had stacks of files that literally were 15 years old. I said, bye, burn them, shredder, out, you know. Who knows where these property owners even are? I didn't want to realize. I mean, people just don't formally withdraw, but we will ask for, we now have a thing in place in the office where if we don't hear back, we will remind them. If we don't hear back a second time, third strike, you're out. You're considered withdrawn, and we'll send them a letter saying your application is now, you know, moved.
If I would ask you a simple question, the North Fork, what percentage is agriculture and protected land? And that is not, in what percentile US regions? Can you answer that question? And then my second question is lack of housing. What are your thoughts there?
So that one of the slides showed what percentage, but
I'm sorry, I couldn't read it, but just
Yeah.
roughly.
that's on the town website and it's on the zoning board, the zoning appeals.
Okay,
The zoning update, those screens are from the zoning update committee's website.
and would you
So
say
can go
we're,
find those then.
Could we scroll to them now?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
sorry,
From a housing standpoint,
yeah,
it's a national issue. I was really involved with it back in Connecticut. It's an absolute national issue. There's not enough housing for the next generations coming up needing housing, and as we all think, boomer state.
is there,
And our houses longer, it creates a bigger problem again. So
is zoning change a part of the solution or?
It can be. And one of the reasons it can be is, the town has developed really, I would also recommend, go to the town's website, you can easily find this. There is a new, comprehensive housing plan. Okay, it's a town-wide plan for the development of housing in the future. And there's a lot of. That's my head. That's an affordable housing district overlay zone. That's one tool the town board has. Which allows, it's a floating zone, meaning it doesn't exist on the map unless they agree to put it there. And that means you can build residential in higher density. Okay. Than what the underlying zone, I mean, if it's R40, you build more houses, that's it. Jasmine Lane, do anybody know that complex in Suffolk? It's off the main road. It was an affordable housing district. It was kind of like Colonial Village, you know, Founders Village rather, Colonial also. Those are the three. The mistake was they were not rendered affordable in perpetuity. And so they become market rate. The cottages, which I was involved with when I was on the housing, Affordable Housing Advisory Commission, we were the group that shepherded that through town board, working with the partnership who actually built it. And people were very upset about it. They thought, oh, it's going to be horrible. Now it's the role model for everything, right? You know, it's hard.
Well, so the role model is it's, you know, it's got a great track record there, and
Well.
oh, that's what it is, it's affordable in perpetuity.
Yeah.
So the people who live there can gain equity, but it's not market rate.
That's right.
So when it turns over, it's much more.
Yeah, and you have to, again, to get in there, you have to qualify.
Qualify
By income.
that's what
And who sets that? Who sets
The range.
the range?
a lot of it's based on. We get federal numbers, and I'm not sure if it's 80% of the federal.
It depends on what size your household is.
Yeah.
You know, if you have 4 kids, or when you get 2 kids. I think
Oh, okay.
Most of them are area.
yeah, they're area. The problem is that we wound up, our land costs are higher than Suffolk County, I mean Nassau County. And Nassau County's income is higher than Suffolk County. And so we get caught between a rock and a hard place. Because that's one reason, that and the fact that all of what used to be called starter homes, remember starter homes, you know, you would like trade up and as you got greater income, you had more kids, you get to go to a bigger house. They're gone now. They're all, for the most part, purchased by people who have wealth And they may want to someday retire out here, but now and their income is missing, and they're paying off their mortgages then. And so we have to think outside of the box and come up with a lot of creative ways. There's no one way to. I mean, in 2010, the code was changed to allow these sort of small accessory dwelling units on property. But again, that code has been changed a number of times. But the idea was to allow, you know, family member, like, let's say you've got grown kids, you've got kids, and they have nowhere to live. So you say, oh, you live in the house, I'm gonna go live in the apartment. It's just the two of us, we'll go with it. There are some real advantages to that. My plumber is living with his mother, and this is a very common, very, very common. So you've got to really think about a range of tools that we can apply addressing this, but she's right, it's a national.
I have a question about the ADU concept. I find the 750 square foot maximum to be too small. You certainly can't put a family of four in.
No, you can't.
No, it wasn't intended.
Well, why not? Why couldn't
Because
we?
then it's double density. Then you just, everything's double density.
Here's another problem. Usually one of the advantages of a small, because then it's considered an accessory to a principal dwelling. It is not two dwellings. State code says 850 square feet more is a house. That's what the state code says. Now, here's the problem. The advantage of smaller ADUs is that they can, first of all, you don't have to pay for more land that you build on. Secondly, you can usually hook into the existing septic system. And that's a lot of money. And then, you know, there's a lot of approvals required by the health department. All these things cost money. So,
They're supposed to be, also they were supposed to be owner occupied. To make sure that you had people live there. And they're trying to either help a family member or someone on the affordable housing.
Or a first responder that's needed in the community.
Well, that's a different, I think that's a different. Category.
well, they have priority in the housing.
Yeah, they're, yeah.
So the first responder, whether it's a nurse or a fireman or a cop, has to be on that list.
For an ADU.
Well, that's for, but not in a house.
No,
Because you can do the ADU outside like in a garage, but there's also ones that we pass those, so you do it as it's like in a house without going to.
Right.
So if you have a large house, you could cut off an apartment under 850 square feet.
Yeah,
And
actually,
because then you know who's living in your house, but it's gotta be on.
that was.
Otherwise, it's just two family houses.
That was something that was originally heard as a special exception permit by the ZBA. But once it was a possibility to go into an accessory structure, like a barn in the backyard, or, you know, as a garage, attached garage or something, it then became as of right, you could do this in your house, just for a permit with building department, but it's based on square footage. It cannot be, it used to be no greater than 40% of the size of the dwelling. It's been changed a couple of times. So not exactly, you know, it's like 220 square foot minimum, which is, you know, a walk-in closet. But, well, my apartment wasn't that much bigger in the city.
The idea really being, it's not a multi-family zone at that point, you're really looking at it being an accessory dwelling, and that's why it's small. And it's fitting a certain need of people and not, it's not meant to be a family form.
Speaking of smaller, I'm thinking, that some communities have done, tiny houses, communities for homeless.
Yes.
And maybe having tiny house communities for, apartment, you know, for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we considered that in our.
Yeah. Well, tiny houses, ADUs, I mean, they're all the same kind of thing. There's some different kinds of ADUs. One is a conversion of an existing building. You know, like we've been talking about, like a barn or garage. Another is you bring it on site. And it's already built.
A prefab.
A prefab. That can.
Modular.
Yeah, that's an ADU.
Or granny pad.
Or you can build it from scratch on the property. Each of them has advantages and disadvantages. You know, I'll tell you, that's right. Our comprehensive plan and our housing plan are really good documents. As a professional, I'm telling you, they are something we should be proud of. And most of it was done in-house. And, you know, it took a long time because they had full-time jobs to do on top of all this other outreach. That's why it took so long.
When you're saying they're good, why are they?
They're visionary, they're realistic, they are specific to our community, our town.
Yeah, they were done through community based.
And as I said, it's hamlet by hamlet. And it also it gives you goals to set, you know, it's so well laid out to say, this is how we're gonna get there and who's involved. There's even a section that says which group of people will make the decisions to move forward. It's just, I'm from another town and, you know, had plenty of money and this, I've never saw anything like this. It's an amazing, amazing blueprint for the town.
That's right, you know, in many ways, we're a small town still, I hope, I'd like to think of us that way. But in other ways, we have been remarkably progressive and proactive, both with land preservation, but also with the legal documents we put in place. I have looked at other municipalities, and I hold my head up high. I mean, some of them come from up island, they get a whole bunch of groups, you know. Come on, bring it up.
I have a question. I don't know if this falls within the purview of your division, but Cutchogue in particular has had an emergence of structures that look at best like military bunkers and at worst like Nazi death camp structures. And that, I mean, when we're talking about trying to maintain the tone of a community and the personality character of our neighborhoods, how do things like that happen? Do those go through your office, or that just through the building department and they just emerge and then the town is stuck with that and we all have to look at it even though it's wildly out of context? How does that happen?
Well,
We
here's
have
how it happens.
all these things in place.
Commercial properties.
I'm talking about residential.
No, I know.
Okay.
They have an architectural review committee that looks at what they look like. Okay? We do not have such a thing unless they're in a historic district, which then regulates what they might look like. But we don't have an aesthetic police force on residential properties because who's going to legislate taste? I mean, you may think it's hideous, I may think it's hideous, but somebody spent a lot of money thinking this is their dream. You know, they think it's beautiful. This is a tough one. And believe me, I have driven by some of those houses. I've got like, you know, but the bottom line is, where we start with that? I mean, if it was your property, there are such things as property limits.
Is it something that really we need to watch out for? I mean, I don't. I mean, there's so many that are mushrooming up like fungi overnight.
There are community associations that do have
Yes,
and enforce, and it works. And yes, people push back, but it does work. So my question really is a piggyback on that one is, how do you get that started?
you do what the civic association said, you gather your neighbors together and you say, we have a common purpose. We want to participate and be engaged in our community. We want to put some restrictions on what can get built in our neighborhood. Activism.
To a certain extent, those things do affect the rest of our values.
You have design standards for commercial.
Yeah.
So you're looking for residential.
I'm just wondering, I'm floating the question.
But you know, an architectural review board could certainly make, you know, much like the zoning board could say, no, we don't like this, or maybe if you revised it this way, it would mediate the conflict between what you want to do and what you like.
But I'm gonna play devil's advocate because that's my role a lot in life. do you really want, so you, just using examples, somebody really likes modern houses, and somebody else likes a colonial or shingle house from Nantucket Low. You know, coastal, or modern farmhouse is a big looking thing. Do we wanna live in a place where our neighbors gets to say what our house looks like? Because that's kind of, in my opinion, that's kind of against.
It's freedom of expression, you know?
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it came up in my zoning board of appeals in Greenwich, it came up a lot, because we started to see some new temporary houses come in, and people hated them and screamed, and the neighbors always were up.
Right,
I'm very familiar with them.
we lived it for a long time in Forest Hills Gardens. And what happens when someone wants to go a little outside the rules is they applied for a variance and they made their case.
But you also were in a planned community.
Right.
Yeah. They were designed a specific way with a specific goal and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what happened out in Suffolk. We had lots.
Or most places,
Which is
or most
why it
places.
doesn't look like a ticky-tacky suburb. I mean, we have a lot of diversity.
But don't you limit the height of that house?
Yes, that, well, yes,
Yeah.
there's a lot of them. That's regulated, the lot coverage, the height, the setbacks. But there's still built these very modern houses in need all those. Right. Yes.
Isn't that what we're doing with the whole comprehensive plan, designing what we want our town to look like?
But not necessarily the look of the house, because you want, maybe I like a white house and you like a gray house, or natural wood versus not natural wood. Where do you stop at that?
I'll tell you, I will argue this as well, as someone who taught architecture for 45 years. If I have a colleague who's an architect who comes before my board, and I have the audacity to say to him, I don't like what it looks like. I mean, there is not an architect on a review board that would take that stand. I mean, we would not, sometimes talented architects understand something called contextualism. In other words, you can make something that looks new without historic mimicry. You don't have to copy a salt box to have that scale, those materials, that profile. That's called contextual design. In other words, you look at what's around you. And I'll give you a perfect example of a bad example. I worked in Newark for many years, university's NJIT, they kind of founded in 1974. And they started building near Penn Station, these high-rise buildings, and the popular material was reflective glass. You know, everything looked like bronze glass. Well, birds would fly into them, of course, because they see other birds. And when the sun hit, you just turned the corner and the sun would hit and bounce off, and honest to God, you were blinded trying to drive. But where did it come from? Oh, we'll use glass and it will reflect everything around. All those old buildings will be reflected in this glass. And that is contextualism. Yeah. That is called, fake materials. I mean, it just, so from an architect's point of view, there's one way to see it. Innovation is important, innovation with materials. But as someone who also loves and respects where I live, I do understand all of your concerns, and I don't object to modern architecture, but I do object to something that is glaring out of scale. When you have two little tiny houses, and then you've got some, what looks like a 3-story house because it's on pilings that are 10 feet out in the air. That is destroying me. That's not just about, it's a modern building.
And may I suggest that if anybody wants to continue this conversation tomorrow morning at the Cutchogue Diner, it's a perfect example of keeping the conversation going.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to stop the meeting?
Thank you.